Denver. I'm new to our faculty, Professor Darren Moran, and you know Dr. Isidro Ibar from teaching theory last year, guitar this year, so I'm not sure who's going first. So I'm going to just turn it over to the three of you, and off we go. So please welcome them.
So this will be more of a panel sort of discussion. Dr. Ibar, his specialty, one of the ministries that God has given him is working with musicians, helping them find a financial basis, helping them sort of structure what they do in a business way so that they can make a living and not be broke. And he's also a producer, and if you go to his website, you'll see like Laura Esteban is one of the people recommending him, and he has a lot of credits. And then of course Darren, we introduced him a few weeks back, and he's a producer. He's worked with a lot of big names. He's, as a matter of fact, he produced a couple with Toby Keith. Didn't you produce a couple with Toby Keith? Yeah. And you've been nominated for a Grammy, right? How many? Oh, sorry, four nominations. So we got some good guys up here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of pose some questions, and you guys at any time, you can raise your hand, you can ask us a question. Ultimately, I know what you want me to talk about is how to get a record deal, and how to get an agent, and we will definitely hit on that. But there's more to it. The two questions that I want you to think about as we're sort of discussing things are, why do you want to be a musician? That's number one. Why are you here? And number two, what will the challenges be between now and that moment that you walk into a career? So the way I thought I'd open this is that I have each sort of share a brief testimony, but focusing more on what were the challenges to your career and how did God overcome them? What did it take to overcome those challenges? Because we know you're saved. I know Isidro is. I don't know about Darren, Professor Ron.
Hey.
One thing you'll notice is that we're friends. We work together in the industry. That's important. Remember, and we're going to hit on this in a little while about relationships. But one of you guys start. Tell me about your testimony. God calls you into the music world. What were the challenges, and how did God overcome them? What happened?
That's a big question. For me, I literally was called into the music industry, and I had always loved music. It was always a passion of mine. But getting from the practice room into the industry is a whole different story. And I think I grew up with those delusions of grandeur of I'm going to hone my craft. I'm going to get into school. I'm going to be aggressive and get a record deal, and then I'm going to be okay. And that's not the way it works. So I'd say that the biggest question was, why do I want to be a musician? And for me, that's because it's more than just a passion. I think that it's noble to have a passion for music, and I think it's probably fair to say that pretty much everyone in this room has a passion for music. But taking that step and saying, okay, Lord, if this is something you want me to do, how am I going to find my way in this? What do you want me to do? And I think that is key. That if you're pursuing your plan, let me tell you right now that the music industry, have you guys seen that saying where it says, it's something like, the music industry is full of robbers and swindlers and blah, 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 and then at the end it says, there's also an upside? Have you guys seen that? Okay, it's kind of true. So, to go and think, okay, easy money, have fun, you got to have fun. You got to follow your passion, but you got to have a plan. And so that's where seeking God came in for me, because I graduated from Adams State College with my bachelor's degree in music education. That was my fallback, music education, and I worked hard at that. But I went into grad school and got my master's of saxophone performance and jazz pedagogy, And I was lined up for some pretty great teaching jobs when God stopped me dead in my tracks. And it actually, Isidro's a big part of the story. It's too long to tell now. But God just said, no, you're going into the industry. And it rocked my world because I moved to Denver, which is not a music mecca, by the way. I think probably what you guys have going on here at the university probably supersedes a lot of what's happening musically in the town. A lot of the music in Denver actually is university-based. And so it's a good place for learning. But God said, I want you to go to Denver and I want you to become a full-time musician. So that was the challenge for me, is how do I go from practice room to making a living? So I gigged for a year or two, and I was gigging 4, 5, 6 nights a week. I was playing a church gig, and Isidro was my boss at that point. And God really grew me during that time, but I realized very quickly that if I was going to make it in the music industry, it was more than just pulling my saxophone out and playing and getting paid, $80 a night or $100 a night. But rather, I needed to seek God on a full plan for my career. And this is probably going to lead into some of what these guys are going to talk about, but diversity. Go to a financial planner, they're going to talk about diversity in your portfolio. And if you want to be a surviving musician in the industry, you've got to have diversity. You've got to be able to do a number of different things. And so that was kind of the beginning of my journey.
For me, I would have to say it was a long road, absolutely a long road. Before I came out here, as some of you know, I'm originally from New York City, Spanish Harlem, and I grew up, my father was a worship pastor, and just growing in that environment, music is looked at, kind of different in the Spanish churches. And so actually, when I did a lot of research at that time, I was, praying, God, just show me, what is it that you want me to do with my life? What is it? So, like when you go off on a tangent, how many have experienced that? And when I say that, I went from music, studying music when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then when I graduated from college, from high school, I said, you know something? And this is when I went off on a tangent. I want to be a doctor, a medical doctor. So I took 2 years of pre-med. A lot of people don't know this. But I wasn't happy. I was thinking more about, how it would be looked at and how people would look at me. He's a medical doctor, where I'm from, in the Dominican Republic. If you're a doctor, that's awesome. A musician, there's a lot of musicians everywhere. But the number one thing that I want to say is that I did not have peace. Absolutely no peace at all. So then after praying, fasting, and just seeking God, I moved out from New York City, came back here. This was, quite a few years ago. And, but what happened was that when I came here, I really felt that God was dealing with me. And he said, you know something, I've called you to be a minstrel. I called you to worship me. I called you to be creative based on what I've given to you. And I was really struggling with that. Spoke with my dad for a long time, spoke with my mom, and then after that time, I said, you know something? I am going to pursue what God has placed in my heart. Now, it took a while for me. The most important thing that you really need to think about, it took me a while, but you have to have that resolved within you. Don't do it because of the money you think you may make. Don't do it because of the fame you think you may have. Because these guys are absolutely right. It's a tough world out there in the music world. But if God has called you, remember, your steps are ordered by God. And if God has called you to do that, he is going to open up the doors and he is going to make it happen. So for me, it was the number one thing was just being resolved within myself that God has called me to do what he's called me to do. And you just go for it, because sometimes you'll get challenges, and this is what happens also. Just because God has called you to do something doesn't mean it's going to be easy. You're going to have a hard, road, but once you get there and you're accomplishing what God has called you to do, and then you'll really experience the fruits and the benefits.
Was there ever a time when you guys, where it was one of those feet on the road or feet in a different direction moments where you were ready to quit, circumstances were so hard? Did you guys ever have one of those moments in your careers?
Every day? No, not every day, but I've had several of those. I mean, I've been in the industry for, 20 plus years now, and 20 years self-employed, and Isidro's point is crucial, that inner resolve. Lord, what do you want me to do? We know this. We live in this world where there's this glorification of music and music industry, and I'm just going to tell you that is not God's calling for your life. I'm just going to tell you that. The glorification of musicians by the world is not God's purpose for you, but rather, as his apostles served Christ and served the kingdom of God, that is God's calling in your life. In some way in music, if he has called you to this, he has a place for you, and in that place is his provision. I have friends who are at the top of the business, believers who are touring with the biggest names in the world. I have friends who you'll never know about. I have friends who teach music at music stores and have huge impact on people. I have friends who play the biggest stages in the world. At the end of the day, it's about what God calls you to. And so that's a very individualized process, but yeah, there were several times. And I'd say the crucial thing with those is that every time I hit that point, I did what Isidro was doing. I was on my knees saying, Lord, if this is what you want me to do, then make my path clear. Show me what you want me to do. And he did each time.
There were quite a few times that I was very discouraged, and I'll be honest. I remember one time, I won't mention any names, but I was contracted to play on a CD. And I didn't know much about contracts or anything, so it was a verbal agreement. Verbal, yes, you'll be playing on the CD. And this was a project that I was really looking forward to being a part of. And I worked on the music. The music was sent to me from LA, and I worked on this, worked. Then, 2 days before the recording session, the producer calls me and says, you know something? I'm so sorry, but I'm going to use, I just found out that my friend is coming from, I don't know where this person was, in Europe or something like that. And apparently he is going to be in town, and I'm going to use him. And I was crushed. And those are things that happen. Now, was I capable to play? Yeah, I know I was, and he even said it himself. But it was somebody that he graduated, from high school with. So it was one of those things, I'll put you on the CD. But that's just to give you an idea. If it's not resolved within yourself, you are going to deal with something. It doesn't matter, you just have to, just go through it, go through the plow.
And I'm going to piggyback on that because opportunities that look like a big deal, that look like, oh, this could really open up the door for me, this is not always God's plan. Sometimes it is. I've had, by God's amazing grace, I've had incredible successes in the music industry. I've had a chance to work with some incredible people and some very, very famous people. But there were times that were not like that. I remember, how many of you guys watch football? Yeah? How many of you watched that really sad game yesterday? So you guys know this guy, this announcer, Phil Simms? Yeah. The guy, Denver's not too happy with Phil Simms right now. And I wasn't too happy with Phil Simms either a number of years ago. I was really working hard in the industry, and I got a call from a friend in New York City who said, our ad agency just picked up the contract it was for NBC or CBS, and you know those little public service announcements, the more you know? They used to play them on Saturday morning cartoons. They had called and they wanted music for a public service announcement, and so they took submissions and I submitted music and I got the contract. And it was signed. And Phil Simms was the guy to do the public service announcement. And so I'm sitting at home broke, just desperately needing a paycheck. And it was about $10,000 or something. It was a lot. And And it would have really helped my life a lot at that point. And Phil went in to do the filming, and he just completely ruined it. He couldn't say his lines. He couldn't stand the way they wanted him to stand. He couldn't deliver when he wasn't talking about football. And so they called me up and said, well, we're sorry you won the contract, but there's a clause in this contract that says that if the lead person can't do it, the contract is nullified. I had another one years later with Leapfrog, the toy company, and they had me design a sound logo for their Leapster. You guys know what those are, right? And they had 3 composers they had commissioned to do these, and they said, if you get this gig, one of the 3 of you is going to get this gig, and if you get this gig, you can be wealthy. Like wealthy beyond your wildest dreams, because you get royalties on this toy, and you guys all can imagine if, when you turn on the Leapster, and it makes that noise, right? Well, I had designed about 200 noises for the Leapster, and they called me the day before 9/11, 10 years, was it 12, 13 years ago now. And they said, we want to let you know that we've gone through all the sounds, and just between you and us, we want you to know that you have won the bid, and we'll be making the official announcement tomorrow. And so I'm thinking, wow, I'm set for life. And the next day, the phone rings. I wake up and I see the Twin Towers crumbling, and I get a phone call, and they say, well, we're sorry. In lieu of 9/11, we've decided to take the operation in-house. And so 3 months of my life had been robbed from me, and I was bitter for so long. Someone came up to me, this was just a few weeks ago, and they heard that story, and they said, you know what, Darren? That wasn't someone taking something away from you. That was God protecting you. And if you knew my life circumstances, it absolutely was God protecting me. Had that happened 10 years ago, there were some things that happened in my life a couple years ago that it would have been an utter disaster. And so God was really protecting me for something that looked great, but underneath it wasn't the right thing for me.
Yep. And there are a million of these stories that we could share with you. But when I first got married 23 years ago, I'd been a worship pastor, and I'd been playing concerts, and literally since I was 10 years old, I dreamed of writing symphonies. I started composing when I was 10. When in high school, I started working on symphony ideas, and I was playing piano. I was in a band, and one thing after another, God was wooing me to Himself. He was using my desires and what I wanted out of music to woo me. First thing happened, freshman year of college, I'm at Berkeley, parents show up at the door, my brother and bandmate was killed. Boom, knocked me down, but I know there was a resolve in me to keep going. Kept going. I get married, and this was 23 years ago, and my career is going well. I've already released a few albums. I was working towards another album. I had been playing tons of concerts, and one day I woke up, I couldn't move my hands. The pain was so severe, I couldn't take my wallet out of my back pocket. And I'm a piano player. I was in a job, I was working in a recording studio, I was a recording engineer, and the only way I could type on the computer was I had to hold a pencil in each hand and use the erasers to type on the computer. The pain was so severe. I was wearing splints at night just to keep my hands parallel, because the moment they moved, the pain was just searing. And so I was taking painkillers, and my wife, we were newly married, Kay, she was trying to encourage me. So I saw specialists, I saw physical therapists, I saw doctors, I saw surgeons, I saw anybody who could help me. And the resolve after they x-rayed both of my hands, and this is a guy that all I wanted to do was play piano and write symphonies. I was saved at the time and knew the Lord, and they finally x-rayed my wrist, and they saw that I had this birth defect in both my hands, where the bones from my forearm had grown into my wrists. And so every time I turned my hand, the bones would grind against the bones in my wrist, and it sounded like popcorn being popped in a microwave. Popcorn going well. And so they gave me the 2 options. Here were the 2 options I had to face as a musician. They said, we will surgically fuse your wrist to your forearm, and you won't be able to play piano, but you'll be out of pain. Or you can just stop playing and find a new vocation. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to stop playing. I'll find a new vocation. We'll just figure something out. And my wife was really supportive. But then there was one day I was praying, and I woke up in the morning, and I remember I looked across our apartment and I saw my piano. And something said to me, you're not done. You have more to do. Don't give it. Despite what the doctors had said, what the people around me, even Christians were saying to me, something said don't give in. So I got up, got out of the bed, I took the splints off my wrists, walked to my piano, I started playing, and it was painful. I started playing, kept writing. That was 23 years ago. That was over 2,000 concerts ago. That was over 200 film and television scores that I've written ago and a symphony ago. God told me I wasn't done, despite what the doctors said, despite what friends were saying. I knew that I had to keep playing. You know what I did when they told me to stop playing? I went out and I got a full-time worship leader gig. I did. In Arizona. And I played 4 or 5 times a week. Led worship 4 or 5 times a week on a piano. You know what? The pain started to disappear. I don't have any pain now. Not a stitch of pain. I'm sure the x-rays would still show that I have this, it's called carpal boss, not carpal tunnel, but it would show that I have this condition, but I'm still playing. You're given a choice as musicians, all right? Ultimately, the theme that I'm hearing is you need to know what God has told you, where God is calling you. If God is calling you to do something, then God will provide and make a way despite the circumstances around you. Is that the theme?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, now we're going to go, because ultimately you guys want to know how to get a record deal. So, let's talk about promotion and marketing. Do you guys have websites?
Yes.
Yes. How many people have websites? Whoa. How important is a website, Darren Ron, to your business?
10 years ago, it was the most important thing. Now it's the second most important thing.
What's the most important?
Social media has actually overtaken websites, but they're both very important. And you're actually convicting me because I need to update mine.
Why don't you send a tweet right now while we're hanging out? You got a website too, bro, right?
Yes, and that has helped me a lot. Well, there's so much in my head, we've been talking about so much.
Just tell
But
them.
anyway, yeah. But yes, the website has been absolutely a big blessing. And the reason is because when you have a website, it demonstrates the professionalism that you have within yourself and what you can deliver when you have some type of recording gig or production gig or something like that. But for those of you that have taken my theory class in the past, we talked about this. And that is, if you're going to do a website, it has to be immaculate. It has to be awesome. Because it would give the clients or possible clients just an idea of who you are. And it would demonstrate what you can do and what you've done.
It's like the other half of your resume, the most important half of your resume. Because if you go to someone and say, "Oh, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this," that means nothing. But if they can go online, if they type your name into Google, and the first thing that pops up is your website because you've been on the web long enough and you have enough web priority, and they go to that and they see a list of clients and they hear music clips and they see videos and they see your work in action, that's going to get you hired a lot quicker than a piece of paper, for sure.
Well, it also affirms everything you say to people. I can't tell you how many times it happened. I don't know if you guys have had this happen, where I'll be talking with a producer on the phone, I'll be selling myself, I'll be pitching myself, I'll mention Emmys. So, I've won Emmys, and these are the films I won them for. And then I get an email, and I send them to my website. And then I get an email the next day that says, "Dude, I just went to your website. You've won Emmys. There's something about a website or an online presence that's affirming. It confirms who you are and what you're saying. And I wouldn't have a business, literally. I wouldn't have any of my gigs without a website. So those guys that didn't raise your hand, what's Weeble? Weeble's free, right? Was it Weeble? Weebly. Weebly's free. There are a lot of ways to build your website. Social media. What platform do you guys recommend the most?
Real quick. Go buy your own name as a domain name right now. If someone doesn't have your name as a domain name, go get it now. Because 10 years from now, you'll go search for that and you'll be like, whoa, 10 people have my name.
Yep.
Now's the time to do that.
Yeah, and seriously, especially if your name is like, John Smith, please, go buy your website. That was the first thing I did. I own like charlesdenler.com, my littlerivermusic.com, my publishing company, grumpymusic.com, another company, purplepiano.com. I own a ton of .coms. I just go out and buy them. My wife loves it. She looks at the checking account, she's like, you're buying more domain names, stop it. I just,
Yeah, but they're cheap.
they're cheap and
It's cheaper than Starbucks.
yeah, and I've made money just having owned them. So as far as social media, Facebook, Twitter, which one?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Right now, I think Facebook has brought me a lot of work. The personal interaction on Facebook, of course, your fan page and well, it's not really personal, but a page where 5,000 of my closest fans can be in touch with me. I can't tell you, I just got a message this week. I was praying and saying, Lord, what's next? What do you have through the fall and the spring? And I get a Facebook message from a young sax player in Texas who says, I've admired your work since I heard these songs on the radio, and someone's investing in me and I want to do an album. And so, boom, all of a sudden, a lot of work through Facebook. Twitter is a great place to have a social presence. So I don't know, maybe both of them, for being a witness for Christ, awesome tools.
Well, here's a question for you guys, ready? How important is it on Facebook to take a picture of what you're having for dinner to show everybody what the awesome dinner you're eating?
Not so critical.
When I approach Facebook, I don't know about you guys, but it's a business card for me. It's a way for me to reach out to producers. And I have a lot of producer friends, a lot of artist friends on Facebook. Facebook is not me talking about the relationship that didn't work out. Or, I had a bad day at work because I know Steve Taylor is going to read my Facebook page, right? So what is my Facebook page for? It's to tell you about the high points of my life. It's to tell you about the high points of my career. There's nothing wrong with me sharing a little bit about my family, the good things that are happening, but I'm very careful. I sculpt every single Facebook announcement very carefully because I want you to have a good picture of who I am in my career.
And in ministry, guys, Facebook can be incredibly powerful. I started off my career focused just on the business, and God began to convict me. A few years ago, Darren, your platform has built now. It's grown, but I want you to use it more for the kingdom and less for your self-promotion. And so he started leading me to post things on my Facebook page as he led me. It might be a verse, it might be an encouragement. A couple of years ago, I woke up one day and felt God wants me to post something on my page, and it seemed really trivial to me. Like, are you kidding me? And this was my conversation with God. Are you kidding me? And he's like, no, I'm not kidding you. I want you to post this. A short little line. 2 days later, I get a message from a fan in Brazil. And they said, I traveled to the United States, and I had come to the United States, and they basically had been beaten and left for dead in their hotel room. And they were planning on how they would take their life. And they turned on their cell phone right before they were planning on killing themselves. And the post that God had laid on my heart to post came up on the screen. And they said, that post saved my life. And to me, it was completely inconsequential. But this ties back to what Charles and Isidro were talking about at first, that if we're doing this for God's will. So even though we want to be smart, we want to be business-minded, and we do, yes, Charles, we don't want to put every personal detail on there, but if God is calling you to use this platform for Him, you'd be surprised at how many things, how He can use it. something as simple as Facebook.
You also have to think about that when you're on Facebook, you have to think about the intent. What is it that you want to accomplish? Because like what Darren just said, you don't want a possible client, let's say you have a big client that you may do some business, music business with, and then nothing against this, but it's really nice that you have a muffin somewhere in Yale, you know, and then, well, and also that Joey's walking for the first time and all that, but you have to really have the correct intentions so that your business can grow. Now, like they're saying as well, it's also good to use Facebook as a glass door to where you're at, you know, spiritually. At least they'll know you can be a minister, you can help and encourage people that are down. So that's another way that you can
And
use
you
it.
got to be careful, because while you posted that you were having a muffin at Yale, the client is reading it saying, wait a second, he told me he's working me on my song today. Why is it not in my inbox right now? You have to be very careful and intentional about how you use social media.
You do. But it is a tool. I would, as musicians, I would encourage you, don't look at Facebook as a way to update your friends anymore. Look at Facebook as a way, look at Facebook as a way to further your career and as Darren and Isidro were saying, to minister to others too. But remember, it's a tool. You're out there, and producers, they do look at these things. Record companies, they do look at these things. So you really want to be very aware of who your audience is with Facebook, and spend more time in relationships here at the school than you do trying to build them on Facebook. You get where I'm going with that? Okay. I like to look at careers. When I lecture about the music business, I always start with this. And some of you, I'm going to bore you. Some of you guys in my business class, I'm going to bore you with this. But you've heard me say this before, and I'm to the point of redundancy. Your career as a musician is a ladder. It's not an aluminum ladder. It's not a steel ladder. It's not a fiberglass ladder or a wooden ladder. It is a ladder made of people. Every rung on that ladder in your career will be a person. There are times when other people will be rungs on a ladder. There are times when you will be a rung on somebody else's ladder. Our business is built on relationships. If you're going to take anything away from today, remember the relationships that you have around you and that God will bring into your life, the divine appointments, those will be the things. Believe it or not, I mean, it's not going to happen through like a Bazooka Joe card and you're going to look and it's going to say, look, you just won a record deal. That's not how it's going to happen. It will happen because you know somebody who happens to know somebody, or you've been calling record companies, you build relationships with the secretary at that record company, or some guy who sweeps floors at that record company, and he happens to know somebody, and you slowly build relationships in. The way into this industry is through relationships.
Yeah, and I'll add, don't burn bridges. You burn bridges, this world is small. You think, oh, and someone in some small town in Mississippi, no one's going to know who they are, and I'm really upset at the way they dealt with me, so I'm going to burn this bridge. You have no idea how small this world is. I've been across the world, on the other side of the world, in an airport, and bump into someone, from here in Colorado or from LA, and that's critical. If you have that reputation of taking care of business and treating people right, and that means usually putting others, it always means putting others before yourself. If you have that reputation, you'll be working for a while in the industry.
One thing that I've noticed is that will really absolutely help you is every time you get called, it can be a recording session, a gig, or some type of big concert or something like that, you have to go there humble. You should go over there, how can I make this situation better than what it is? Well, when I say that, it doesn't mean to, I am this big person and I am really good singer, because this is what's going on in the music business, in the world of music business is that it's almost easier to be a part of the team, and if you can make things easier for the producer, they will most likely hire you, no matter how good you may be on an instrument. Let me give you an idea. Let's say, number one, rehearsal is at 9 o'clock. And if you come in at 9:45 without calling or anything like that, you know, that gets kind of tiring. They almost at this point feel, well, you know, so-and-so, they're more dependable. They may not play as well, but they are more dependable, and they just bring something, their spirit. They're so positive, you may most likely get the gig.
You will get the gig.
You will get the gig.
I do this, that's what I do for a living.
Yeah,
Is
and that's what I do.
hire session players and bands, and you do the same.
I do the same thing.
And man, I know some real hot shots that I will never call. Some of the best musicians I've ever seen in terms of technical capability, but in terms of how they function, both rehearsal, timeliness, schedule, personal life. You show up to a gig and they're spending more time trying to find a girlfriend or boyfriend than they are trying to play music. This is a problem. But also their spirit for God, their spirit to work for others. Someone who really is a top-notch pro will always walk into a situation saying, how can I support whoever hired me? It's not about me getting to the front. You're talking about the rungs on the ladder. There are people who try to use the rungs on the ladder to step on people's heads. And then there are those that build so many relationships that they just naturally progress up the ladder, and that's what you want. There's more work opportunities that way.
Well, here's a question for you guys then. How many gigs have you gotten by putting an advertisement out in the yellow pages versus through relationships? Like cold advertising versus relationships. Somebody knowing somebody.
Honestly, I've never put anything in yellow pages. But I would say right about 98% has been relationship. 98%.
100%. All relationships.
There you go. So when I stress,
How does the website help you with the relational component? If it's all through relationships, why bother with promoting yourself on the web and on social media?
Because the relationships keep you in business. The website gives you a professional presence that you can't otherwise. Is when you talk about what you can do. This honestly is just about meaningless to anyone. I mean, they might think in their head, whoa, that sounds good. But until they see it, until they hear it, it's useless. And so the website brings validity to the personal relationships.
imagine Brandon comes up to you and says, I know a composer who would be perfect for your film. You need to validate what he just said. You're going to Google me, the first thing you're going to hit is my website. You may listen to samples first, but generally, looking at my website, most people hit my credit page first. They want to see who I've worked with, what I've done. That validifies. Without the website, you just have his recommendation. That's a tough thing. Although his recommendation would be very good. But ultimately, you need to validate what he said. Here's an example of that. IMDb, the Internet Movie Database. In my world, we live or die by the credits we have on the Internet Movie Database. Every film I've ever worked on, everybody I've ever worked with, if you click my name on IMDb, you will see a list of all those things and awards and such on IMDb. I recently had producers came to me, you guys, some of you guys worked with me on this for the Colorado Rock. Actually I'm going backwards. I want to go backwards a little bit. For Colorado Tourism. They came to me, they said, we need some music. We hear you're writing a symphony about Colorado. And, we would like you to consider writing this music. Well, they began to validate it. They began to go to my website. That's the first place they went. They didn't take the Colorado Symphony's word. They didn't take my word. They didn't take anybody else's word. They began to validate it. Why did they need to validate it? Well, because they're investing. They're going to put money into this. They're going to hire me to write music for their commercials. Their commercials are going to go out and represent Colorado. The people who've given them the money, the state of Colorado, expect a certain level of production to happen. Now, ultimately, they knew one thing. What are we doing this campaign for? What are we hiring? If I hired Darren to write, or in Isidro to produce something for my album, the ultimate goal is to get that album out there because I need to make a living, because I need to see capital coming in. Well, in the case of Colorado Tourism, they needed to hire me because they needed to bring more money to Colorado. They needed more people to spend their money, tourism dollars, in Colorado. I didn't realize how sort of hefty this was when they first hired me, because I'm like, nah, it's Colorado Tourism, what do I care? That's great, here's my symphony. And paid, that's even better. And that's what I'm thinking in my head, right? You know what they're thinking? And I didn't realize the staff, there's a Denver Post about 3 months ago released an article. They've been telling and keeping track of how much additional money this campaign for Colorado Tourism that I wrote the music for, how much additional money it's brought into Colorado tourism dollars. Now, they're able to track that. And so the Denver Post released this article. Guess how much money this campaign, additional money, not past money, not building up, additional money this campaign brought into Colorado. Now, some of you guys know the answer, but somebody guess. How much money, additional money this brought in? So this is what they're thinking. Somebody guess, make a guess. 4.5. 4.5 million, that's a good guess. Anybody else?
15 million.
15 million, that's good. The campaign to date in the last 2 years has brought in $1.8 billion. So, I'm a guy. So this is what they're thinking though. When they're hiring us, when they're hiring you, they're thinking, this has to make it. I've got a lot of pressure from my bosses, from the people around me, so I need to validate that this person can do the job. So they're going to go to your website, they're going to look you up on Google, they're going to see your last Facebook post, your last tweet, and if it's about an Egg McMuffin that you're eating, it's not going to go over well. But if your tweeting and your Facebooking and your presence on the internet are appropriate and talking about the things that will sell you, that's how you're going to get that gig. That's how you're going to stand out.
There's no second chances in this business. Your first impression is everything. So the relationships are the calling card. That's the open door. The website, the work history, your legacy musically, what you've done is what helps secure you the work. Once you get that work, okay, SRT students, so I've been giving you assignments since the beginning of the year, and some of you have put some real time into it, and some of you have gone through it pretty quickly. Listen, in the music industry, you don't get a second chance if you don't deliver 100%. You know how we get A's and B's and C's and D's? Here's the music industry. Only people who make a living are the one that gets A's every single time. Whether you're sick, whether you're not sick, no matter how you feel, you have to get, and this ties into excellence for Christ, right? We talked about this. How many of you guys, we haven't seen the Christian music industry rise above the secular music industry, and it's not just because of the world. I mean, God obviously has given the enemy dominion over this world, but it's also because we haven't seen true excellence, very much true excellence in the Christian music industry. We have seen some, and that's what we need to strive for. Our work needs to be absolutely, completely, 100% unquestionable.
One of the things that you have to really think about as well is that, I may walk around here in the School of Music, the building, and listen to some of you practice, and you got to get your sight reading up, you got to get your scales happening, your repertoire, the recitals coming, but there's another side. You have got to have the business side handled correctly. And when I say that, you have to know how to manage. You've got to know how to manage. So when I say that is, let's say you get called to do a gig. And they say, do you have a band? Can you put a band together? You gotta think and I was talking to Professor Denler about this earlier today. When you're a musician, you're not only a musician, you're also the secretary, you're also the janitor, you're also the arranger, you may be the arranger, the producer. Darren knows this. I was in a situation many years ago, working at a church with big budget and everything. I felt like I was almost in charge of everything. It was kind of scary. You're in charge of almost like 300 to 400 people, and then the budget. So it's not only the arranging, the producing, the relationships, the spirituality, and then the promptness, the dependability, and then just in motivating, getting everybody motivated.
Yeah, I'd say you'll spend 2 to 3 hours taking care of business in your career for every 1 hour you get to spend doing music, if you're lucky.
Yeah. Well, wait, I'm confused though. I thought if you're a worship pastor, all you have to do is pick out a music list. A worship set.
Ouch, ouch.
Oh, okay. Well, I just thought, you know, that's the way I did it. I didn't. Okay, so how important, let's talk about ASCAP and BMI. ASCAP and BMI, how many are registered with ASCAP or BMI? 1, 2, 3, 4.
So there's only 4 people in this room that can actually start earning money with music right now.
Yep, so 4 people, you guys are on your way. All right,
How many of you guys have your writer and publisher membership? 1. So there's 1 person in this room that gets a full paycheck. The rest of you only get half. Just so you know, your music royalties on ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC, any of these companies, are 50% writing, 50% publishing. You must have both. If you sign up with a writer's membership and don't have a publisher, this happens to me all the time with people I work with. I'm getting my check in the mail, and these people call me, I haven't got my check yet. Well, you know why? Because they don't know where, if they're not seeing a publisher attached to the writer, they're not even sending money, so you might not get any of your paycheck. So,
well, let's explain.
and this is free, right?
It's free.
Yes.
Well, no, it's $50 now.
For some, I think ASCAP is still free.
No, we just found
Did
that
they change
it's
it?
$50 for each.
It's worth it.
So it is worth it. So here's what ASCAP does. Radios are playing your music. Woohoo! Psyched. Baseball fields are playing your music. Television is playing your music. Films are playing your music. You know, oh, this is so cool. You know, my music is being played. Churches are playing your music. That's CCLI. A little different, but the same basic principle. They're playing your music. Now, all of those organizations pay a blanket fee based on their size, based on their outreach, television stations, blanket fee to ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, whatnot, radio stations, a blanket fee based on their coverage, how much music they play. They pay ASCAP, we'll just use ASCAP, this blanket fee. Same with churches with CCLI, based on the size of their congregation. Out of that blanket fee, composers and musicians get paid. Now, if you're not registered with these organizations, and churches are using your music on Sunday morning, colleges are using your music in their services, radio stations, television stations, they're playing your music. If you're not registered, a check is not issued to you. The only way you're going to get a check is if you're registered with a licensing organization, because the radio station, every time they play a song, they write it down on a cue sheet. I played Brandon's awesome hip-hop rap song on such and such a date, and they name the title. They send that to ASCAP. ASCAP takes a percentage out and they pay him. Same with churches. The church plays your music, they pay their blanket fee. If you're registered with CCLI see, oh look, I played such and such a song, you know, they played such and such a song, because the church has to keep track of anybody that plays your music, anybody that plays music, period. Whether it's a club, wherever, or a stadium,
Restaurant,
Walmart, massage parlor,
Elevator.
I heard my tune in Walmart a while ago.
Congratulations. That's a step back. I've seen my films at Walmart. It scares me. You know, when you reset one in your career. So, if you're not registered with that organization, they don't know how to pay you. And you're missing out on money. That money, by the way, cannot be paid out to anybody else. It sits in an account, it sits in escrow. It waits until the day Brandon said, you know, I've heard my music around. I was out at Walmart, and I heard my music. And then one day he sends it to ASCAP, and he writes down the song. They'll go back 4 to 5 years. And I've had ASCAP thank me, because I've registered films that hadn't been registered, the cue sheets. He's saying, you know, this money was sitting here. I'm so thankful that we're able to give it to you.
And they've actually changed that now. They will only go back. Your company's getting cheaper. They only go back about 2.5 years now. I had this problem recently, that a publisher that was supposed to register a song that multiple clients had worked on didn't. So I called ASCAP, and we were within about a month of, if I had waited a month longer to call them, it would have been gone.
Yeah.
So they're even putting limitations on that now.
Yeah, and you know, so to give you an idea of the scope, last year, and I've done well as a composer for film and television. Last year, though, half of my income came through ASCAP. Half of my income. These were big checks. If I hadn't been signed up, I'm just throwing money out the window. I mean, it's like having somebody throwing money at you and you don't want to grab it. As musicians, you have to be registered with a licensing organization.
And let's clarify, when you do what we do and you miss half your paycheck, you might lose your house or your car.
Yeah.
You know, or where you know, this glorified view of like, oh man, you must be rolling in the dough. No, this is your paycheck. This is, we need it bad.
Average, the guy who wrote the theme to MASH, you remember MASH? Every time that theme is played, from the day of its conception on TV to now when they're playing that in remakes like 5 times a day on the Inspiration Channel or whatever, and the channel that nobody knows about, that dude gets a check for between $1,400 and $1,800. So if it's played 2 or 3 times a day, not just in this country, we're talking internationally, he's getting a check for like $1,400. I knew guys who wrote for soap operas, they didn't receive any money. All they would do is create a library of music, hand it to the soap opera company. These guys, and get their ASCAP checks. So it was based on the soap opera using it, putting in their guiding light and such, and Morning Shining on the Sunlight Day, or whatever the name of the soap opera. And so these guys were making over $1 million a year. Their ASCAP checks were over $1 million a year. So all they did at home was write cues and write ideas and send them in on CDs, and the producers would drop them into the shows, and they were making over $1 million a year each.
Those were the good old days, though.
Those were the good old days.
Charles is, Mr. Denler, Professor Denler is reminiscing now. There were days like that in the music industry, and I think maybe sometime in the future we're going to see that again. But it's all based on what you guys are talking about. You've got to be registered. As the music industry resurges, it's like buying stock. Okay, you've got it registered, you have your songs registered, you have general clients. Over the years, that those little cents add up big time.
They do. And now they're starting to track internet. I just got my first internet ASCAP check.
So,
Could you give us your name too?
Gabby?
Gabby, okay.
Yeah, when you're putting your stuff out to producers and on your website and on YouTube and all that good stuff, is that a sufficient copyright, or do you need to physically copyright it yourself?
Did everybody hear that? Go ahead.
It's not necessarily sufficient. Having public access and social media these days, in some ways it makes it easier, but I'm going to tell you something right now. If a big name artist comes and steals your song, you will not have enough money to fight it. You know, I had a song placed in a Sony movie. Remember this Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs? And they ripped me off. So my song was in the movie. They changed the name of the song. I mean, not just they didn't redo my song. The recording of my song is in the movie. They changed the name of the song. They sold it to a proprietary company who licensed it to Sony, and there's no credits, nothing. There's not enough money for me to go after them, even on a copyrighted song, but you should register your copyrights, always.
Yeah, I've had songs stolen too. It's a bummer. Especially when... Okay, here we go. All right, big question. I know. Here it is. You ready? How do I get a record deal? Oh! Okay. I've been signed, and then I've not been signed. I've been signed, not been signed. How do you get a record deal? You guys go ahead. Jump in.
That's a tough one. It really is. But I think it's just being a machine and just trying to get your music out there. The relationship aspect, when you look at the Bible, it says that people perish because of lack of knowledge. Just learn as much as you can. Learn as much as you can. But that's the $1,000,000 question, or $1,000,000,000 question. To do something like that, you have got to get your relationships together, your website happening, and be marketable, being joyful, being very positive every time you play a gig. This is the other thing, knowing where you stand in a particular situation. Let's say one thing that I have really admired about Darren over these years, and even Charles as well, is that they may be artists on their own, but if I hire them, they don't act like an artist. So being humble and being able to contribute is a key for success in something like this. But I would say just the marketing, being able to understand what kind of music is in now, because I was just talking to one of my students not too long ago, and there's something about just a guitar sound. I remember back in the 80s, Steve Lukather. How many here have heard of Steve Lukather? That guy is awesome, but that sound today is not really the sound. Even the wah. The wah back then, you could play a full chord, right? And use the wah. It sounds kind of dated today. And then, yeah. So today, a lot of guitar players that are playing the wah, they're using one note, like Frank, Selman, one of the guitar players he uses. So being up to date with sound, being up to date with production, being up to date with fashion, being up to date with everything, and even being up to date with what's going on in the world and how you can make a difference in society and also as well as your community.
Well, let me define it even further, because we can get into indie versus major in a minute and stuff like that, but what is the number one, you're a record executive, you guys are record executives, I walk in the door. The number one reason you're going to sign me is what for your company?
Can I make money off of you?
Oh.
And can
Oh,
you,
is that
and
true?
can I,
No.
and
What
can I,
if you're a Christian though? What if
can
you're a
I
Christian company?
sustain making money off of you?
Oh, what if you're a Christian record company though?
It's worse. It's absolutely worse because the market share is worse than Christian music, and so they need more money to keep their boat floating than a secular label.
We call that a niche market, folks. So Christian music is a niche market, meaning it's a very small market. You've got K-Love, right, to play your music, and then you've got, what's the other one, K-Love. Wait, you got K-Love, and so if you're not on K-Love, it's going to be tough.
And if you're on K-Love, you've signed all your rights and money away. So how do you want to make a living? So here's my question for you guys, is not how do you get a record deal, but do I really want a record deal? See, I started my career wanting to be an artist, and I practiced to be the best saxophone player that I could. And none of the doors opened for me. By God's grace, because I stood still and heard that still small voice inside, I went down the path of production. And I'm going to tell you, for every dollar you guys earn as an artist, I will earn 20, because I have produced 20 or 30 different artists. For every $10, $15, $20,000 that you invest as an artist in your career, I can make that money back by investing about $100. Because I've built a portfolio of working for other people. And a lot of people want the glitz and they want the glamour. Personally, I want God's stability in my life. And that means sacrificing my will for His. And I didn't see this early on, but He showed me very clearly. I turned down 5 world tours with very, very big name people that you guys would know to go play saxophone for them. And why did I do it? Because I had a son. And am I going to be a father first? What do you know God's priority system? What? God? Spouse? Children? We work in ministry. Wait, where are they? Did they come down 4th, 5th, 6th on the list? But by keeping God's priority system in line, he kept my career going. And if I had gone the artist route, I'd be struggling daily to make a living.
Yeah, it's not it's not what you think. Before my wife and I had Mariah, I was in Nashville, big record label, and the requirement was touring, massive touring. My wife begged me on the phone, please don't sign a record deal, don't sign with the label, and I agreed not to. And you know what? I have an awesome daughter. I have an awesome son. I have an awesome family. They're serving Christ. You know, I made the right decision. Now, that being said, I am on a record label now. But, and it is awesome. It is awesome. I'm not going to lie to you. It's nice to have people. But I make, for every dollar, 5 cents. If you own your own record label, and you go the independent route, you would make $1 for every dollar. I make 5 cents. How much are you making?
Yeah, probably about the same. I produce for an artist that
Even though they play your stuff at Walmart?
Yeah.
yeah, actually, those things, the royalties are terrible in stores. Yeah, that stuff doesn't bring a whole lot. XM Sirius is the best source of royalties today. Yeah, but at the end of the day, it doesn't all add up. I produce for huge record labels, and they will always find a way. They will always find a way to cheat you out of your money. Oh, we have not recouped the budget yet. You know, and I had one label that owed me about $100,000, and they filed for bankruptcy. Now they were taking vacations all over the world and treating artists to big meals. But what happened is every time they did that, so I'm not going to mention the artist, but one of the artists I produced for, they're flying this guy all over the world, they're giving him steak dinners and this and that. Every time they're doing that, that's recoupable against my budget. And I'm sitting I'm the songwriter at home and the producer. And so they may have earned a couple $1 million on that record, but they didn't, quote unquote, recoup. They find ways to hide that money and spend it. So
They do. It can. You want to be careful. That's where you need your friends and you need wisdom. But overall, you know, music has blessed all of us, and we're blessed for having been musicians. I do want to just open it up to some questions.
What advice would you give to those musicians, well, all of us here, myself included, that have put many hours into practice and wouldn't like to go to the production or business side of music, rather and stay in the performing or the artist by itself part of music, and not much to what you guys do, which is like what you're saying, like it's good, it's profitable, and it's getting a lot of money. But what if someone wouldn't like that, just that part of music? What advice would you give to them?
So the question is, you'd rather be more of a performer?
Not saying it for myself, but what advice would you give to those musicians that don't want to go to the producing side of music?
Okay.
you've got to find ways to diversify. There's no way around it. There's very few revenue streams in the music industry that will allow you to make a living doing one thing. So if you don't want to produce, but you're good at songwriting, you know, network, songwrite. If you, if you just want to play an instrument, learn 10 instruments. Seriously. I play 3 or 4, and that's how I got into production.
That's good. See, did you know anything?
No, that's a great question. I would say, yeah, you have to have, I've talked to, and I've done some financial consulting with some recording artists. And, you know, this individual, his thing was just to say, I got a record deal. Wow, it was awesome. I have a record deal. But this is really interesting. It's going to, you know, you're going to understand this after I state what happened to him. Okay, he wanted a record deal, and nothing much mattered to him than getting the record deal. Okay, wow, that's great. Do you write music? No. Do you arrange? No. Do you produce? No. Do you understand the business side of things? You know, ASCAP, BMI? No. So there's, you know, if you're not a writer, if you're not a producer, if you know, do you know how to run a band? Do you know how to do this, run rehearsals, do get gigs? Do you have an agent? That means, just think about the money that he's going to make. You've got to have a lot of different income streams. You have to. That's the best way to do that.
Yep, that's true.
Two. One for more than stuff. If you're registered with ASCAP and you're playing your own stuff, because I know we've heard this music business, but for those that didn't hear it in my class, when you play your own music or a worship scenario and you're registered, don't you get that money as well?
Oh yeah, baby. When I led worship in churches, I always led worship with my own music. Why? It's called the double dipping factor. Right? So I would get paid to do the gig, and then all of a sudden the check would show up from CCLI, and I'm like, thank you, Jesus. It's double dipping, not me.
If you were in, because I do classical guitar, what is it profitable at all, or is it more profitable to write your own music versus covering off the 8 billion time that it's been covered?
The best thing is writing your own music and having your own sound. That's the thing, that if you don't have like a new approach, it's going to be hard. Like he was saying earlier, have your own niche, your own sound. And if you have your own sound, because if you sound like somebody else, there's no innovation in that.
Yeah, but always weigh opportunity versus paycheck. My first big shot paid me nothing, but it went #1 on Billboard and it opened up my career. God moved into the situation mightily. Because I humbled myself. In pride, I didn't want to take the gig. God said, humble your heart and do this, and I was obedient. It goes #1 on Billboard, all of a sudden my phone is ringing and I'm getting paid gigs. So don't always look just at the paycheck, but yes, original music is where the paycheck ultimately comes from.
So it's like, what's the balance between having your own sound as an artist, but then also knowing the market and what is actually selling and catching people's ears?
That's a great question.
As you're kind of
That mindset will help you be successful. So the answer is yes.
Anybody else? Composers generally go with ASCAP. Guys like Darren, you're doing a lot of radio at UBMI.
No, I'm actually ASCAP.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, in different genres, this is the eternal argument. Honestly, don't waste your time. I got to go this way or that way. Just do it, one or the other. I've heard from some that in CCM music, I've heard that BMI handles royalties better with contemporary Christian than ASCAP.
That's what I've heard as well. I'm with ASCAP, but
I'm in contemporary, a lot of contemporary jazz, and they say ASCAP is better for that.
Okay, we should wrap it up. One more question.
That's kind of split. It could go either way.
Ultimately, I don't think he can find either. Okay. All right. Well, shoot. What should we do?
Please listen carefully to what they said about the website and about your media, social media. That's really important. That's one of the things that PEP is supposed to be encouraging you to do. That by the time you graduate from here, you have your website, you have something in social media, you have a place that's a repository for your body of work. It's very important that you're able to have that. So please think about that seriously, listen carefully to what they said, and thank God that all three of these men are on our faculty. Feel free to talk with them, schedule a time, some other time to pick more of their brains about how they do what they do. And truly, let's thank God that He's brought them here in this place. And with that,
One last thing, guys, too, for all the pitfalls and cautions, and I will say this: when you're doing it God's way, when you put yourself out of the equation, you're doing it God's way, it's awesome. Awesome.
and fulfilling, absolutely fulfilling.
It is. It's amazing. I mean, think about it. Careers in music. I mean, everybody wants our job, right? It's the best thing in the world. I mean, it's career in music. So just think about that as a reward. Just
making your living walking in as a musician is awesome at any level. Whether you're teaching, whether you're gigging, whether you're recording, you're a musician. It's awesome. It's just awesome.